Well, dudes, have I expanded too far out yet? So, I read. I have always read. One of the things I miss most is the massive shelves that my parents had that was full of their books that they've read, that they've purchased. It was massive. Eventually, they had to part with the shelves and most of the books on them. And as a small child, I was also read to a lot, and that helped me ignite my reading spark. Though slowly over the years, I've just fallen off of it, and I don't know why. However, come the new year of our Lord and Savior Miku Christ, I told myself that I wanted to read at least 5 books. So that is what this video is going to be about. It's pretty obvious. And for the record, if you want to see my initial reactions to the book, you can check my Instagram stories, because I like to do a short blurb after I finish a book. Eventually, I plan to create a Goodreads account, but not today. We'll go in order of book completion. First off is The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea by Axio. Overall, this book was a 3-star for me. I read it in just under 2 days and enjoyed it very thoroughly. Some of the elements were very cliche in a way that it wasn't like negative, but the overall enjoyment that they added to the story was very neutral for me. Thinking about it now, I was definitely more in love with it like after I had finished reading it initially at the beginning of this year. So for a brief synopsis, we follow the main character Mina as she chooses to save someone close to her from becoming the bride of the sea god. Typically, women who are sacrificed are never to be seen again in her community. Mina, however, does actually manage to save the spirit world, or rather the town beneath the sea. She does this with the help of spirits who, spoilers, are actually the spirits of her relatives. Of course, she and the sea god fall in love, and she's able to go back to land. I think it speaks to my personal expectations of this book. If I could clock the relatives being her guiding spirits twist really on in the story, pretty much almost as soon as we were introduced to them. The quality of the writing, though, on its own is really good, and the world felt really beautiful on the way it was described, especially the town beneath the sea. There's something so magical about the atmosphere there. I would definitely say that this was a good middle grade book. I definitely wouldn't reread it. And I honestly picked it up originally at Barnes & Noble's because of the cover. It was a beautiful, beautiful cover, and it still is a really pretty cover. I would definitely recommend this book for those who want a casual read and enjoy fantasy, especially if you enjoy elements of Eastern traditions and culture, because this takes inspiration from Korean folklore and whatnot, and I love that. I love that so much. It's one of my favorite literary genres of fantasy with Eastern countries, their cultural experiences and traditions integrated into the work. It's beautiful. My second read of the year was Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Su Lin Tan. This was the best book of the few that I read towards the beginning of the year. This was a really good full 4-star read. It was tasty, and the writing and the overall story. The book follows the protagonist Jing Ying, who is the titular daughter of the moon goddess, Chang'e. She is meant to stay hidden on the moon, but one day decides to just run away. Obviously, because that's how this whole thing starts. She becomes an attendant for a family, and when push comes to shove, she and the prince and the imperial family fall in love. I won't spoil it, but I highly, highly recommend this book, and something about it just manages to hit all of the boxes of what I look for in a good fantasy romance book. The main premise of this book is based on the classic Chinese myth of the archer Hou Yi and his wife Chang'e. There are so many videos about it on the internet. It's such an easy and quick story to read, but I love it. It is easily one of my favorite myths next to the prince. It is easily one of my favorite myths next to the tale of Princess Kaguya. While the book did drag on in certain bits, I definitely wouldn't say that it completely managed to scar my enjoyment of the book, but it is something to take note of if you're someone who enjoys a faster pace in novels. Again, this is a book I would highly recommend for someone who enjoys intriguing romance, yet also an MC who's able to slowly figure herself out and discover herself. My third book was the second in the duology of, the son of the daughter of the moon goddess, which was Heart of the Sun Warrior by the same author, Su Lin Tan. This was a 1-star book. It was a really, really poor successor to the first book. The writing was really repetitive, and I felt like the author was shoving her obviously preferred couple together. Ambiance was not taken into consideration in the story, and it was just bad and nonsensical. The best example, which would be the openings, which I will now read to you. We'll start off with the first book. There are many legends about my mother. Some say she betrayed her husband, a great mortal warrior, stealing the elixir of immortality to become a goddess. Others depict her as an innocent victim who swallowed the elixir while trying to save it from thieves. Whichever story you believe, my mother Chang'e became immortal, as did I. Beautiful. A spectacular opening which captures a lot of the emotions, and manages to like give us a basic introduction to the myth without being too overwhelming, because as myths are, there are hundreds of versions, and whichever one you prefer is up to you. I prefer the one where she chooses to sacrifice herself because she doesn't want, to die, which I get, and she doesn't want, a turn to have the mortal. And then this is the excerpt from the second book. This is again the opening page. Night cloaked the sky in darkness, draping shadows across the earth. While this was the time of rest for the mortals on the moon, our toils were just beginning. Winter-white flames curled up from the splint of wood in my hand. Crouching down, I brushed away a stray leaf from the lantern. Wrought with translucent stone and twisted strands of silver. As I lowered the splint of the wick, it caught fire with a hiss. I rose, shaking the soil from my robe. Rows of unlit orbs stretched before me as a pale osmanthus which flowered above. Moon lanterns, 1,000 in all, would cast a glow upon the realm below. Through wind and rain, their light would not falter, until they were extinguished at the first breath of dawn. I don't necessarily think that opening is bad. I'm gonna be real here. I think that it is comparable to the second book. To the first book, excuse me. The problem is that it doesn't necessarily introduce us to the characters in any meaningful way. I think because the problem with doing a series like this based off of like one specific myth is that there's only so much material there that when you try to write a multi-book series about the same character from the myth, certain details can get lost, because how are you supposed to open the second book? I mean, I understand why they want to introduce the characters because it is the second book in the series, but at the same time, I feel like the opening for the second book was much longer and didn't have the same draw as the first book to me. I still read the whole thing. These were a gift from my uncle for my birthday, and I read them, and I loved the first book, but like I said, the second book just didn't do it for me. It was book openings are a key factor, and the first book drew me in, while the second book, I was still hopeful, but it still managed to be disappointing. Bear in mind that writing a book is very difficult, and I'm not, dragging the author, because not only does she have one book, but she has two, let alone having a book at all is incredible to me. But bear in mind that, if it's written by the same author, how can the quality of it go down? Significantly. I would also like to point out that the writing of the second book is quite repetitive. The author is infatuated with the word orbs. I don't need to go into explain that to you, but orbs. Take a shot every time you hear the word orbs in this book. I was constantly reading it, and in the first book, they say orbs, but it's not overwhelming. It's a little bit of a weird description, but there's so much of it in the second book that it ruined my immersion of the world, and I would highly not recommend the second book, in all honesty. I think that the first one could have been just a great standalone, but instead they had to make it a duology, which significantly devalues the first book for me, because it shows to me that the author just didn't necessarily care about where her story was going, and it felt like the characters that she wanted to end up just didn't fit together in the first book, so she made them fit together in the second book. Which, can I explain to you how weird that is to me? I loved the couple in the first book. It's cliche that the main character is gonna end up with the royalty or whatever, but in the second book, and it ends with them together, so then in the second book she ends up with the demon prince, who is the secondary love interest, but it's difficult to explain. He just sucked as a character in the first book, and this book, the second one, oh my god, you have to like this man in the second book, because it's the end, and in all fairness, I think she could have realistically ended up with any of the two male protagonists. I think that they were good in their own way, but it's just, I don't know. It was really, really weird weird, and I couldn't really get into the second book. And also, can I point out that the covers I have are like sister covers, but the first one is just so much prettier. Like, I think it's just I think the colors complemented themselves more, or at least the colors that were chosen. But if I had to donate the second book, I would, but I would definitely keep the first book. So I highly recommend reading Daughter of the Moon Goddess as a standalone piece of literature. Don't read the second one. I'm literally telling, like, it. You can think of what you want, but I hated the second one, and I feel bad saying that. As for my fourth pick of the year, it was Lady Tan's Circle of Women by Lisa Lee. This book overall was a 2-star. While not a bad book, it was something that I was interested in dropping several times. Overall, it did hold my attention, and I did get what I was promised, like in the excerpt of the book jacket. Should I read this to you guys? I'm gonna read it to you guys. According to Confucius, an educated woman is a worthless woman, by Tan Hushan. But Tan Yongshan is born into an elite family haunted by death, separations, and loneliness, is being raised by her grandparents to be of use. Her grandmother is one of only a handful of female doctors in China, and she teaches Yongshan the pillars of Chinese medicine, the 4 examinations, 6 pernicious influence, 7 emotions, and that the body is a reflection of the cosmos. From a young age, Yunshan learns about women's illnesses, which many of which relate to childbearing, alongside a young midwife in training, Mei Lin, who is my favorite character in the book. The 2 girls find fast friendship and a mutual purpose, despite the prohibition that a doctor should never touch blood while a midwife comes in frequent contact with it. They vow to be forever friends, sharing in each other's joy and struggles. No mud, no lotus, they tell themselves. From adversity, beauty can bloom. But when Yongshan is sent into an arranged marriage, her mother-in-law forbids her from seeing Mei Lin and is from helping the women and girls in the household. Wu Xiang is to act like a proper wife, embroider bound foot slippers, pluck instruments, recite poetry, give birth to sons, and stay within the walls of the family compound, the garden of fragrant delights. So from that description, I got what I was promised by the book. Personally, as a history nerd, I picked it up for the historical aspects of like the historical imagining, because genuinely I really liked the premise of this book, and I liked the elements within the book, but I think it's just kind of boring for me. You follow the character of Lady Tan, obviously, who is working to become the most perfect woman she get for the time period she was in, specifically in 1496, which is mind-boggling to me because of how quote-unquote recent that sounds. And the book does do a good job at that in particular. We follow her life, and as the jacket describes, we see her do all of the wifely things, and we see how she, in her own right, rebels against societal's expectations because she does become a lady doctor, and that's super impressive to me. But yet the book, and I do understand Lady Tan, and I can connect with her as she grapples with wanting to fit in to society and do the best she can while also wanting to find a way to be unique in it, and I loved that. But like I said, it was a little boring, and it did drag on in a lot of the book, and it was just permeated within the writing that it was a drag to read. And something that I will disclose is that there are depictions of ancient foot binding, which women in China, especially the elite class, did really frequently. To summarize what foot binding is, for those of you who don't know, it is the breaking of the bones in your foot and tying them together to give the illusion of a smaller foot. And it is something that was started in ancient China because of an emperor. He liked this dancer who had small feet, I think. And honestly, the whole thing of foot binding was a really large part of Chinese society. And if you cannot, and like the depictions of that in this book are kind of really extreme. So if you don't like that, if you can't handle like very almost graphic depictions of that, this book is not for you. So I will be warned. But if you're like me and a history nerd with an interest in Eastern cultural practices and, you know, religious beliefs and whatnot, give it a shot. I probably would reread this book, honestly, but maybe in a couple years when I kind of forget about it. But not my favorite. That is why it gets a 2-star from me in particular. Finally was A Study in Drowning by Ava Reid. This was a perfect 5 out of 5, dudes. It was so good. The writing and ambiance was amazing, and it fits exactly what I look for in a romance and just overall mystery in a book, because the only other mystery that I have read has been Nancy Drew. I could not get it in. I could not even finish the first book. I got the first 20 editions of Nancy Drew from a family member years and years ago, and I donated them because they just sat on my shelf, and I did not like Nancy Drew. So I loved this. I loved the aesthetics. I loved the ambiance. It was amazing. We followed the protagonist, Effie, as she's a reluctant architecture major. She would love to be a literature major. She loves books, reading, and just stories as a whole, but due to society in the world specifically that she lives in, she can't do that. She's barely an architecture major because women are not really architecture majors. But that was the only thing available to her for her high level of for like her intelligence and whatnot, and her wanting to kind of, how do I explain it? And her wanting to pursue a higher education was the only thing that was available to her. Eventually, she receives a job to rework and redesign the Meriden estate, who happens to be her favorite author, and, you know, she's working with a literature student who is also working on his thesis to try and debunk and ruin his legacy. The two of them end up working together to discover the mystery behind his most famous work, and it's just fantastic. There's a lot of also like fantastical elements that I'm not gonna spoil because I want you guys to read this book, but just, oh, it's so good. I don't know how to explain it, guys. I finished it and it was like, great. And then I found out there was a sequel, and I am never ever gonna read the sequel. You know why? You know why I won't read the sequel? Because of freaking the Daughter of the Moon Goddess duology. I refuse to read sequels now just because of that. I've never had a good experience with the sequels. Oh my, I'm really mad, okay, about The Heart of the Sun Warrior. It's just, the writing is perfect. Well, not like perfect, but the writing style and pacing match up so good together. It's amazing. And also, I would just highly recommend this if you're into a romantic or gothic setting. This book is absolutely going into a top spot as like what a good book should be for me indefinitely. To conclude, currently I'm working my way through the Book of Jereg by Stephen Burst. I'm not really loving it so far, and to be honest, I think I'm just gonna end up dropping it. I will probably be picking up more of Ava Reid's works just because her style resonated with me personally, and I loved it. Not every book that I have read so far this year has been a 3-star and over, and that's okay for me. I don't expect every book to read to be amazing, fantastic, wonderful, beautiful, one of a kind. I get it. That's not how that works. On my book list that I've started, I have The Midnight Library and The Bone Season. I felt neutral about both of them, so honestly, I think I've just dropped them entirely. And I'm really proud of myself for hitting my 5-book goal. I never thought I was gonna do it, and the fact that like the year is almost over and I did it, I'm so proud of myself, dudes. I think that reading is just a really fun thing to do. I'd like to read when there's like some slumps in my day, like if I'm in the car or if I just have like random 5-minute gaps in my day and I don't know what to do with them. I like to read, so I carry a book with me. I know a lot of people tend to read before going to bed, but I can't do that. I need to use that time to catch up on anime. So obviously reading throughout the day is the only way I'm gonna get books done, realistically. Let's be real here. And I have problems, mental and physical problems, so reading at night when I'm tired is not gonna work for me. Thank you very much. I need to have everything pumped into my skull through my eyeballs. So yeah, that concludes today's video, my guys. Creature from the Black Lagoon is a work in progress. I need books. ironically enough, to annotate. It's like I have like 30 minutes of it done on my computer, but you're just gonna have to wait for those. So yeah, let me know what books I should read. I do have a TBR forming, but I don't have money to spend on books. And I hope you guys have a wonderful holiday season if I manage to get this video out by then. Thank you guys. Hope you have a wonderful evening wherever you are. Bye bye.